Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten Katsaruba, and I'll be the moderator for today. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and ATARC is an organization that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. ATARC provides ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to welcome all of our attendees that are logged in and joining us today, and give a special thank you to Dana Jackson, Brian Dennis, and the entire Akamai team for making today's event possible. Today, we are going to hear from our panelists. We have a Q&A session planned, and we're also going to pop in a few poll questions as we go. So if you're at home as the audience, make sure to answer those poll questions in order to ensure that you receive your CPE credit. We also have the option to submit questions or comments of your own in the chat, so be sure to do that as well. I would now like to welcome all of our panelists to please come off camera and just come off mute while you're at it, because we're going to do a quick round of introductions here so we can hear from you who you are, what your title, your role is, and what agency or organization you're with. So if we could begin with Landon, please.
Good morning or good afternoon. I'm Landon Van Dyke. I'm with the U.S. Department of State. I'm a senior advisor on technology, strategy, and adoption. I pretty much help the agency and all of our embassies bring on new technologies and adapt it to our processes and our business operations.
Amazing, thank you. Let's go to Elena next.
Hello, Elena Peterson. I am from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. We are a national research laboratory for the Department of Energy. I'm a cybersecurity researcher and a group leader, and we develop the kinds of tools that Landon might take to go help the State Department in its work.
We have stolen some of your stuff. You guys did great stuff for us.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it.
All right, let's go to Jeff next.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Voivoda. I am a senior data architect with ASRC Federal. I am currently supporting USCIS in their Zero Trust integration services. And we are right now doing an assessment of their data pillar maturity in hopes of identifying gaps where we can help them to get their maturity scores up to advanced and optimal.
Wonderful. Okay, and let's hear from Karen next.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Karen Howard. I am with the Treasury Department Internal Revenue Service, the IRS. I am the director of the Office of Online Services, and we are basically charged with advancing the agency with digital applications so that taxpayers and the taxpaying community can self-serve when it comes to meeting their tax obligations. Happy to be here today.
Great, thank you. And then Brian.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Brian Dennis. I'm the principal technologist for the public sector here at Akamai, where we power and protect life online. Our goal is to make life better for billions of people, trillions of times a day, specifically through our areas of security and what we can do to help organizations in the federal government right now really find their way along that zero trust pathway. So I'm glad to be here today.
Great, thank you. All right, we're going to begin with our Q&A, and we don't have to go in any particular order. So if you do want to jump in, just wave me down. We have a raise hand icon to let me know. Jeff, so if you don't mind starting us off with the first question, I'd love to hear from you. Jeff, what are the biggest challenges that organizations face today when it comes to securing APIs in a rapidly evolving threat landscape? So if you kind of talk to me about one of your biggest challenges, what you see, or anything that comes to mind when I ask that question.
Oh, yes, ma'am, I certainly can. There's a couple things that come to mind right away. One is, if you think about how many APIs you have that are in your infrastructure, whether they're active or inactive, there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, across your data landscape. So one of the things that we're having some issues with is the lack of visibility. In other words, how many of those APIs do we have out there? Where are they located? Are they active? Are they inactive? So one of the things that we are pushing at the USCIS is to get a full accounting of the organization's API inventory, as well as implement some rigorous version management. The other issue that I've seen, not necessarily at USCIS, but at other organizations, is what I'd refer to as loose APIs. And basically, what that means is an API that is returning superfluous information or information that whoever is asking for the information does not have authority or has not been authenticated to receive that information. And obviously, that's going to lead you to risks of improper usage, data leakage, and unauthorized access. So it's definitely there's an issue there with the visibility and inventory management. So it's that's where we're seeing issues.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. So if there's another panelist that wants to jump in, Jeff mentioned lack of visibility, loose APIs. Is that pretty common for the rest of the folks online, or is there something else that is a challenge you want to bring up? Go ahead,
I'll
Karen.
jump in here. Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things in addition to what Jeff mentioned, which is probably one of the number one things as we look at, continuing to look at, threat vectors that are surrounding our applications, including APIs. I would add inconsistent authentication and authorization, right? So without consistency there, you end up, and I've seen this, I don't know that I've actually experienced it where I am today, but I've seen it in other organizations and in past lives, that it leads to like this fragmented or misconfigured security in regards to use of some of the tokens. Some don't enforce scope and weak keys that can easily be exploited. I think when you also look at rapid changes and weak API governance, right? Sometimes we get so involved in how quick we can get things out, we forget, and this goes back to, again, what Jeff mentioned, how many APIs we already have out there, how the lack of visibility to them, the lack of knowledge about them. I think the more APIs you have, the increased threat vectors you have. And so it's even more critical that you understand the inventory, but also that you have governance so that there's tracking, there's auditing, and that transparency and visibility stays top of mind.
Thank you, Karen.
Mhm.
Anyone else? So Karen brought up inconsistent authorization and authentication. Any other comments?
I'll make a quick comment on this as well. And so I think that one of the things that we're also seeing is, APIs have been around for quite some time now. And so we've got APIs that are rolling around in systems, these ghost APIs that are just existing within organizations where they don't really know what's actually going on inside of them because of that lack of visibility. And so what we're seeing is the organizations that have been building the APIs weren't necessarily in tune with the security organizations within as well. And so we need to make sure that security is paramount as we move into this API landscape that is just booming. Since the 2000s, we've really had this massive amount of APIs that have been growing. And in the last few years on our side within the security industry, we're seeing a ton of APIs being exploited because it is the easier way to get that information because they're pulling so much data back and forth.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Brian. Anyone else before I bring up our poll question related to this?
I'll just jump in to say that sort of lends to the whole secure by design that a lot of folks are working on as well. I think newer systems are probably a little more secure, but the legacy systems that were mentioned are a harder problem to fix.
Absolutely. Landon, it looks like there's a question specific for you in the chat, just someone asking about how state is dealing with modernizing and speeding up data-driven processes and overall security, cybersecurity.
Well, I would like to say that we're above the rest, but in reality, we're tackling the same things that all the other agencies are. I would say, in particular for APIs, we started off our journey with an API management system off the bat, and a lot of other organizations, basically wrote their client, their application for doing the API. So you usually have a runtime app that will just, bring the data to whoever's asking for it through the API gateway. But with a management gateway, it allowed us to basically track, what APIs are out there and start cataloging them. And so it did give us a little bit of an advantage on that aspect. And in particular, most agencies, in fact, all agencies are supposed to have a chief data officer and a data governance structure that's in place, which is also supposed to be cataloging all data sets. And in the process of doing that, understanding how those data sets are being offered up to internal stakeholders or external stakeholders is vital, for just the chief data officer. So again, having that platform that allowed all, if you want data, this is the platform you go. You just turn to that platform, you start looking at catalogs, you start to see what you're allowed to get to access, what you might want to have access to, and here's the point of contact to talk to that, body that's maintaining or managing that data. All of that's extremely important, but having a management system for your API kind of helps with that.
Thank you. So with all that being said, I'm going to call for poll question number 1 to get a gauge for the audience's response on what their organization's biggest challenge is when it comes to API security today. So again, for our audience at home, this is for you. This is how you receive your CPE credit. So be sure to respond to the poll question number 1. And we'll take a moment and look at those results once we have enough submission. And we'll move on to our next question from here. So we'll give that another moment. And if ATARC could post the results, we'll see what the rest of our audience is struggling with here. Looks like a lot across the board, but lack of visibility into APIs being the most popular response. All right. Well, thank you all for responding, and thank you to our panelists for getting things kicked off. So question number 2 is around zero trust. Whoever wants to jump in and respond to this first. The question is, how can the principles of zero trust be effectively applied to improve API security across diverse systems and platforms? And I think this goes along with another audience question that we had. I saw something about zero trust pop up. So who would like to respond to that one first? Brian, I see you came off mute. You want to
Yeah,
go?
sure. I'll take a stab at this one. The zero trust journey is moving along for so many different organizations, and everybody's kind of doing it at their own pace, their own speed, and their own practice. And so when we start talking to groups who are going through this and really making sure that they can improve their API security along the way, some of the things that we're highly suggesting is obviously to just never trust by default. That's pretty much given, always verifying who is using the API, how access is being granted, making sure that there's very strong authentication that's going to be in play. Obviously limiting access, not, you don't want everyone out there having access to where to what they honestly don't need within an API. Monitoring constantly, and this becomes very, very tricky. Like Jeff mentioned earlier, there are a lot of organizations that might have thousands of APIs out there. And so, really building a system that can monitor and understand, where this information is going, how the data is being collected, how it's being transferred. And so at the end of the day, it really comes down to what can you do to really segment out and isolate some of these APIs. And so within legacy systems, that's a really great route to go, because so many legacy systems these days are still in play and we still have to use them. And yes, I know a lot of organizations would love to update, but they're kind of stuck right now when it comes to some legacy systems. And so definitely getting the idea to, wrapping your head around the idea of segmentation, within your APIs, building a network that has that visibility, the ability to segment, and then the ability to make those APIs as safe as possible.
Thank you, Brian. Karen, would you like to share next?
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that. So some of the principles of zero trust that I've seen effectively applied to improving API security. A lot of what was said earlier, but just to dive a little deeper, enforcing strong identity and access controls. So really understanding who has access, why do they have access, and even putting controls around that, to what extent they should be reaching in. Of course, there's always that continuous monitoring, and that's always going to be a challenge, especially if you don't know your inventory, right? I would say probably another one is apply the least privilege, right? So granting minimal access based on the roles of the person, their scope, and the attributes that they bring to the system. Just giving blanket access it just increases the risk. And if you kind of apply those and build it into your governance model, then zero trust is baked in from the beginning to the middle to the end.
Yeah, thank you. Landon, go ahead.
I would just add on to that. We always had a model of a in and out system for our APIs. So if we wanted to actually share data from another source, we would have it's basically one way, right? So you have an API port, you can push data through this one API. If you are accessing data, only reading, you can access it from another API. And so we would actually cut off the levels of controls that you can have for any one API. So you're eliminating some of the risk of data being injected incorrectly, or being deleted, or some additional commands sneaking through an API system. So very much with the zero trust, it's like, well, for us, there's only a certain amount of people we're going to get data from, and we know who those people are, and we can identify them, and we can put them into a completely different pool of people we're working with and how we work with them. There's going to be a different set of people that will take our data, and there's even a set of people that will take our data for the public. And so we would actually have different pools for APIs as well, just for the public, right? And we know on the back end of that API, there is only publicly available data. We made sure we yanked out all of the actual data that would be internal and kept it away from that one. And so there are different ways you can apply zero trust throughout the entire process of getting data and pushing data. And I would say, again, an API gateway, like a management system, will have different controls that you can put on there. You can say, hey, I want to make sure this API is only read only, right? Now, on the back end, the people that are scripting this, they also have to put in their script, this is a write only, or this is a read only, or this is a delete capability. But if they screw up, your management gateway will catch it, right? So even if they went and they copied and pasted the wrong code into the new API script that they're creating, you still have a backup. Now, you should always have people overlooking each other's, work. But what I'm saying is, if people are in a hurry, things need to get going, you have a secondary backup that will be able to help you apply those principles.
Thank you for sharing. And we probably have time for one more comment. Anyone else want to jump in before we move on?
I'll jump in real quick. It just kind of ride the coattails of what Karen and Brian said about your identity, credential, and access management. Many organizations really need to graduate from the role-based access control into, and now evolve into, attribute-based access control, as well as context-based access controls. That way you have a finer grain in the front, using that API as an enforcement point for things like geographic location, time of day, even the version of the software that's trying to access my components, right? So you've got it down to such a fine grain that you can control even down to the user level.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you so much. And I'm going to call for our second poll question here up on the screen that also applies to that question we just responded to, which is, has your agency or organization implemented zero trust principles to secure APIs? So please take a moment, our audience, For this one, to receive your CPE credit, you want to make sure to respond to it before it disappears. Okay, and then moving right along to our next discussion question. Karen, I'd love if you would kick us off here, which is, in what ways are AI and automation transforming the way that we are detecting and responding to API threats? Oh, you're muted.
You would think after all these years, you figured out that you should come off mute before you talk. So yeah, this is a great question. I love this one because we really are looking at leveraging more APIs, and we have to continue to think about what we're using them for to transform, the way we detect and respond to the threats. I would say the first thing is really intelligent anomaly detection, right? Especially with the IRS, looking for fraud, looking for any bad actors that are trying to do things. So having that automation help us do that in a less manual way allows us to respond easier. I think automated threat responses, throttling, blocking, revoking, and isolating suspicious APIs is another way that not only the agency but lots of organizations are really starting to use. I think someone else mentioned earlier, and I'll just kind of deep dive on behavior-based kind of risk scoring through continuous learning. So as you learn what's going on, what's working, what when you're seeing, then kind of automating for them to look for that behavior and score that risk based on that behavior as the tools continue to learn using AI. Those are probably some of the top three. I think probably I could probably think of maybe one more. It really helps in the reduction of false positives where we spend time chasing something down a rabbit hole, which really was something valid. Really helps through the learning and the automation and the the expedited responses, us to spend time on things we should be spending time and less on things that aren't as critical. So that would be my response.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Mhm.
Who else would like to jump in next?
I'll just add that AI is helpful also in the idea of the scale. So we've been talking about just how many APIs we have out there, and just handling the scale of all of that data. I think is something that AI can certainly help with in an effective manner. And then just also adapting to things that evolve, right? Predictive analysis, evolving threats. It's hard to reestablish any security in an evolving threat sort of landscape. So AI can really help with that in traditional machine learning types of ways that AI brings for us.
Absolutely. All right. Any other comments from our panelists? Brian?
I'd like to take that question and kind of flip it around, because I think that definitely there's so much benefit for all of our organizations to start utilizing AI to help them along this process, because what we're seeing is threat actors utilizing AI. And so, we're seeing the weaponization of generative AI, where they're taking large language models and they're just throwing as much as they can into it to build their attacks for them. And so we have to be as unique and forward thinking as they are when they build their attacks. Since these large language models have come out, we've seen over 1,000% increase in API attacks over the last few years. And this is only going to get worse because it's gotten easier for them. And so for us, utilizing every tool in the toolbox is going to be very important for us moving forward.
Absolutely. Okay.
We also have to make sure we're defending the APIs used in all those large language models, right? Those also need to be pretty secure.
All right. I'm just going to check the chat real quick. All right. Looks good, guys. Any other comments here before we move on? I'm going to call for poll question number 3 then to gauge our audience on what their top priority is when it comes to securing APIs. So poll question number 3 is up on the screen for our audience. What is your top priority when securing APIs? Please respond to that. And then we'll see the response once we have our submissions. Okay, and moving on to our next question. Elena, I'd love to begin with you on this one. What lessons can be learned from recent API security breaches, and how can they help to inform future defense strategies?
So I think I mean, some of the lessons are obvious. API security is very important. As was just mentioned, attacks are growing exponentially as a way of getting in. So, I mean, all the things that we've talked about, I think just show how important doing all of that security as early as possible in the process, secure by design, and then secure implementations, bringing zero trust to it, monitoring, as was mentioned. I'll add too that regular audits and updates and some of the culture around making sure API security happens is important. If some of the breaches have perhaps pointed out some lacks in those areas. And then just making sure, again, with the culture thing, like all your development teams, all the people working in these areas have security top of mind when they're doing these things, or that we are actively testing our code, not just for efficiency and performance, but for security.
Thank you, Elena. Yeah, absolutely. Any other comments on that or experiences that you want to share based on these lessons learned?
I can add one thing that I think is so important and even applied beyond APIs, right, is security and understanding the threat vectors that are out there must be built into your DevOps, right? It has to be part of how you deploy, how you manage the life cycle of the products. So rapid and rush deployments without that security review often leads to vulnerable APIs that are only discovered way down the path, if you even know that, based on the previous comment, that API exists. If your inventory is so large, you don't even know. So I think setting a process, and it may slow down things by a day or two in your development, but it's certainly worth it to take that time and build that into your product management and make sure APIs, in the DevOps process, that security is built in.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Jeff, did you want to go next?
Yeah, actually, I was just thinking of one thing, and I don't think anyone has mentioned it at this point, but one of the particularly vulnerable aspects or components is endpoint authentication, right? Particularly your public-facing websites or your public-facing APIs. Those could be particularly vulnerable, particularly if people are coming in, based on their phones, or they're bring your own device type of thing, or even IoT, some of that thing. So zero trust that framework also needs to be extended to your endpoints, and those endpoints need to have just as strong authentication and enforcement, that least privilege access, as your normal network perimeter.
Thank you, Jeff. Landon, can we hear from you on this too?
I'm sorry, can you say it again?
Can we hear from you next on this?
Oh.
It's not a comment. I thought you did.
No, lessons learned on API. Everyone's pretty much hit a lot of the notes. You gotta have really good monitoring. You gotta have really good authentication. I would, to Jeff's point, many organizations just need to mature up and start issuing individual tokens or certs for people accessing an API, so we have a better understanding of who's accessing this. And it allows an AI algorithm in the back end, or a machine learning algorithm in the back end, to start understanding context of who's accessing this, and from where and from why and from what machine, and the common commands that are hitting the API. And again, if you have a particular population that you're dealing with, you can cater your security and defenses a little bit better for that population, so you can have a dedicated API. And I know I've said this already, but an API management system does allow you to catalog everything. It allows you to do zero trust a little bit easier, because the front end of it is usually up to date in the latest and greatest security techniques and stuff, and we'll be able to do the logging and the monitoring a little bit easier. And if you're still sitting with a legacy API, you can still tie those things into an API management system. And so you at least can track them a little bit better, even if they are, you know, very simple, simply constructed or whatever.
Thank you. See,
If I could add, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Elena.
I was going to say, if I could add on to that too, all that monitoring and all that data helps those of us who are trying to develop some of these things have that kind of data to develop with, all right, or you can use it to do some predictive modeling and with your AI. So I just foot stomping a little bit on that being a great tool.
Yeah.
And then if I can add one last thought, when we start thinking about the recent breaches, these breaches occur. These breaches are going to continue to occur. And so we need to learn from these breaches and plan for incidents. We can, and so just having the right people, the right technology, the right staff on hand to make sure that your APIs, your entire systems are as protected as possible, but at the same time, understand that 0 days exists, that we're going to see attacks, that we've got an attack network out there that is bigger than we've ever seen before. And so we have to put a lot of thought and process into, okay, what if something goes wrong? How do we respond? How quickly can we make sure that this is taken care of?
I have more of a question, I would say, than a comment, just for thought. Doesn't have to be answered here, but one of the things, because APIs have become, so it's the easiest way a lot of times for bad actors to get in. Is there a process that we should think about? Is an API really necessary? Is there another way? Because, the more you have, the more threat and risk you have, right? So I think part of that governance process is to say, is there another way? Especially if you look and you see that maybe you don't have controls around how many APIs you have, or you don't have the platform that allows you to manage it easy. Sometimes an API seems like the easy solution and the easy answer, but to think beyond just API, while we know that is the easiest and fastest way for bad actors to infiltrate your organization.
That's a great question. Any other thoughts from the panelists on that, if we have any?
I think that one of the things is we've become so comfortable with APIs. They're easy to build. DevOps can put them together, in days sometimes. And so, coming from, before I was with Akamai, I was in the university world, but we were researching all of this so much. And I know that there are great young people out there right now who are looking at the problems we're having with APIs and thinking of, okay, how can we either A, do this better, or B, change the entire system? And so, I think as we progress with our technology, we'll see better ways to do it. I don't know if that means replacing APIs or just finding new ways to make sure that they're as safe as possible.
Anyone else? Okay, so I want to get into our next question then, which also kind of ties into an audience question that we had come through, which is, how can organizations balance innovation and integration with the need to also maintain strong security and compliance standards around these APIs? So any thoughts around innovation and
thoughts there? So my first, and I'm head of office of online services, and we're all about, the latest and greatest for taxpayers to self-serve with digital applications. But I have to constantly remind the team that the mission to innovate should never come at a cost of breaking something, adding risk, or being non-compliant. So it may mean slowing down, may sometimes mean not being the first to do it, right? Sometimes we want to be the first out of there, kind of let somebody else pave the path, but be close behind them. So the short answer, as you've probably heard me say a couple of times, is governance, fostering collaboration and aligning security, development, and business teams through shared governance models, with the understanding that, yes, let's innovate, but let's not put at risk these other things that are so core, especially to, IRS and protecting taxpayer data and PII.
Of course. Thank you, Karen. Yes. And Jeff, did you want to respond?
Yeah, one of the things I just want to point out, and we have all been saying this again, but it always bears repeating, is to try and implement automation wherever you possibly can. Just in even mundane activities like tagging and classifying your data, monitoring and auditing your usage logs. Those things is where you can start integrating your policy and your regulations into the products that you're building, right? Because we all know if once you start having to manually intervene on a particular operation, let's face it, manual intervention slows innovation.
Yep, absolutely. All right, thank you, Jeff. Who else wants to share their take on this question?
I'll jump in as somebody who tries to innovate as much as possible from where we're at. There can be sometimes the idea of innovating just to innovate, and I think Karen sort of led towards this. Sometimes innovation should be, sorry, I'm not saying this very well. The innovation should be needed. It should really advance the mission, and not just innovate to be innovative or to do it because it's possible. It should really advance the mission in some way if you're going to engage in that.
Yeah, thank you, Elena.
Yeah, no, most projects should almost all projects should have a scope, right? You should have a mission behind it. You should have goals. You should have stated goals and a scope so that you're not constantly innovating and that you never get the product out the door in the first place. And obviously, you definitely need a development environment to do all of this in. So if you're innovating, if you have your best friends are on a blue team and a red team, and you've innovated something and you've got this great project, you can say, hey, go ahead and have at it. See where we had the flaws, but at least it's not in a production environment where it's potentially harmful for everybody else. So, but definitely good governance and making sure you have stated goals and a stated scope, and then make sure you keep people to it, which is always a challenge, especially when people like to innovate and they like to fly into the crowd. So, it's part of the fun part of technology. But
I feel like you're looking at me.
yeah, I am looking at you. I'm looking directly at the clouds and everything.
And then as the guy from the private sector, and I can probably expect the eye rolls at this point too, as organizations working with the federal government, don't be afraid to reach out to the private sector. We understand that innovation is tough. Innovation is hard. It is grueling, time consuming, and sometimes you hit brick walls. And so, Akamai is not the only company out there doing great things with the government right now. And so our focus is to make sure that the people and organizations and customers we serve understand that the technology we're creating is trying to be as innovative as possible as anything out there. And so sometimes you don't have to recreate the wheel; it's already been created. And so that's just feel free to reach out, as the commercial guy would say. So.
Well, I want to underscore what Brian's saying because I joined the government 4.5 years ago from the private sector. And the number one thing was we're never going to beat them to the punch. So why not partner, learn from them, and ask for their help because they've already done it. I remember my first year with the government constantly saying, hey, we're not inventing the wheel here. I've come from places that's done this. And let's reach out and partner and make it easy. Yes, we have nuances in the federal government and extra hoops to jump through, but they can help us, avoid mistakes and accelerate what we're trying to do in a more meaningful and productive and effective way. So kudos, Brian. I'm right there with you.
And Jeff, did you want to add anything?
Sure, I'll add something. If you ask, I have to. I just feel compelled. So, no, but I will. I'm gonna underscore exactly what Karen and Brian said. Reusability is very important. If you've got a process that you've either developed or that you have mutated from another process that is really working well, why not make that into a template and use it over and over again? You're not gonna be able to use it like as is. But if you've got a foundational product or a foundational process or procedure, absolutely reuse it if you can.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, so we're coming to the end of our hour here, and I want to wrap up with hearing from each of you on what your biggest takeaway from this conversation has been, over everything that we've discussed. in the last 50 or so minutes, and what you want to leave our audience with. With that too, I encourage you, if there's anywhere that you want people to connect with you, maybe if you're active on LinkedIn or some other social media platform, you can plug that now so that these conversations can keep going. Any working groups that maybe you're a part of that are open to both industry and government, this would also be the time to share that with our audience here today. So let's begin with Landon, please, if you could.
Thank you. I would say from what I've been hearing today, definitely the challenges for APIs, and I probably haven't been working on them as long as Brian, but about 10 years ago, we started experimenting with them. And there weren't as many cybersecurity issues that we were focused on at that time. Today, obviously, it's, by multitudes, right? So I would suggest, if you are in the business of having oversight of them, or building them yourself, start asking the questions, like, well, do we have this thing set up to limit the amount of data? Do we have it to set up to let us know when things are happening that are excessive or more than what we actually intended it for? Are we set up for, like, all of a sudden you might all of a sudden have like 2 million users that have just been issued tokens because they want to access your API, and you would say, hey, how many what do you call it, login checks do I get? Those are the type of things you ask your developer, like, hey, if how many attempts do we get, right? Does this thing provide pagination of data? Does this thing provide truncation of data? You start asking these questions, and all of a sudden your developers sit back and go, well, we don't actually know. And you're like, okay, well, that's an area we need to start working on and focusing on. And you start to see, little blind spots in your system. And like everybody here has said, there are lots of smart private sector and government sector areas that can help you and provide you some advice. And the P&L, they do a great job at documenting a lot of their stuff too. And so there's a lot of things out there you can read online. You can find out what some of the best practices are, and then you can play stump the chump with your developers when you come back the next day and start asking them questions, right? So, but my suggestion is to have fun with them, because they have dramatically changed the way we operate for our organization. It has prevented our organization, for the State Department. We have lots of different offices that would say, this is our data. We don't know how to share our data. We can't get our data over to you guys. We can't, it's not interoperable, but it's very much not accessible. And we want to know who's touching our data. And we're like, okay, well, that's what an API can do. And so it dramatically changed the way we as an organization operated. So if you're not in the business of APIs, look at them, and then also look at ways that you can manage them. So good luck.
Thank you, Landon. And we'll go to Elena next.
So it's interesting because all of the sort of topics that we covered, zero trust, AI, what we can learn, that can be applied to a lot of different things in cybersecurity. APIs are coming around as one of the things that now are becoming vulnerable, or at least a method of attack. And how do we mitigate those? A lot of the answers we have, I think, for these are very similar to the answers we have in other areas too. It's just that we focus on this because it's the other thing to focus on. I hadn't heard the term ghost API, so thank you, whoever said that one. I wrote that one down. I hadn't heard that term. But the other thing I will say is ATARC does have a DevSecOps working group, and I'm on that working group, and we discuss things like APIs in that process. I'm fairly big on the idea of secure by design and starting security as early as possible. I'm an old school software engineer where we never worried about security. We didn't care if APIs gave out extra information. We didn't care who had access to them. In general, we used them so that our code could be more portable and more efficient, et cetera, at moving data around. So I'm big on doing security first versus over the top, which I think we've talked to a little bit here as well.
Great. Thank you, Elena. And we'll go to Jeff next.
I had to get off of mute there. So yeah, the one thing I'll take away, and I hope everyone takes away, is again, APIs are everywhere, right? APIs and the gateways, and they're not just for use on the front end of your components or the front end of your perimeters, right? They are everywhere. In fact, a perfect example of that is deep in your infrastructure somewhere on your control plane, you have a policy decision point that is using an API to talk to your policy enforcement point that's on the front line of your network access control lists, right? So they're everywhere. So which leads me to my other thing that I was trumping about earlier, which was you've got to centrally manage, and I know everyone else was talking about this too, particularly Landon. You need to be able to centrally manage all of the information about your API, how they're being used, the ingress, the egress, who's authenticated to use them and who's not, and that kind of thing. So again, that centralized management is good to know, and please inventory those APIs.
Yeah. Let's hear from Karen next.
Well, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think the biggest takeaway here is to start from understanding how big the breadbox is, right? And that inventory, understanding how many you have to deal with and making sure you have the right things. And then the second point that Landon brought up was having an easy way to manage them. So the API management platform or system, once you know how many you have, that might drive your decision to figure out a way to manage them more efficiently. So for me, that's the biggest thing that I would hope people take away is at the very beginning, you got to know what you're working with before you know what you have to do. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. All right, and Brian, we will have you have the last word.
I agree with everyone, and then I'm going to sound like a broken record. If anybody has heard any of the other ATARC conversations I've been a part of, we need to keep having these conversations. The more that we can talk about this, the more that we're going to understand, the more that we're going to encourage people to want to learn about APIs and what they can do to start making this a critical area of our cybersecurity. I will preach this from the mountaintops every time I get a chance. We don't have enough people working in cyber today. We really need to build our labor pool up in the US to make ourselves as safe as possible. And there's probably going to be a lot of jobs that are coming around where API is going to be very important to understand. And so encourage everyone you know to learn more about this and to really understand that this is not a problem that is going away anytime soon. And so we all need to prepare for what this new area looks like for us as we move forward. So thanks everybody for this today. It's a good conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to thank our partners at Akamai for making today's event possible, and our panelists, of course, for being here and sharing all of your perspectives. And thank you all at home for joining us. This has been a wonderful discussion, and we hope that you'll join us for our next event every Thursday at the same time. And there it is up on the screen. If you didn't know, you can go register on our website to attend that one. And then last but not least, respond to this poll question about receiving your CPE credit so that we can send it your way. All right, everyone, have a great week. Thanks again. Talk soon. Bye.
Thank you.